I have spent 50 years studying every major monetary transition, every debt cycle, every empire that has risen and fallen under the weight of its own fiscal excess. I have sat across the table from presidents and prime ministers. I have managed money through the 1971 Nixon shock, through the 1987 crash, through the 2000 dot-com collapse, through the 2008 financial crisis. And I am telling you right now, as directly as I know how to speak, that what I am seeing in the data today is something I have only seen 3 times in my career. And every single time I have seen it, the investors who recognized it and acted on it compounded extraordinary wealth. The investors who waited for certainty lost a decade. I am going to give you a specific number in about 90 seconds that tells you exactly why this moment is different from anything you have experienced in your investing life. Stay with me. Before we go any further, subscribe to this channel right now. Not at the end. Now. What I am about to walk you through is the analytical framework I have developed across 5 decades of studying monetary cycles. I am giving it to you here for free. Subscribe and then do not move. Here is the number. 85%. That is how much purchasing power the US dollar has lost since 1971. In my research across 500 years of monetary history, I have documented this pattern with mathematical precision. Every time a government accumulates debt beyond its ability to service it through taxation or growth, it turns to the only tool that remains. It makes the currency worth less, not worthless. Worth less, gradually, quietly, in ways that do not show up on the evening news, but show up very clearly in the purchasing power of everything you have saved. The United States is now carrying $40 trillion in national debt. Interest payments have crossed $1 trillion per year. The government spends $7 trillion and collects $5 trillion. That $2 trillion annual gap has no viable solution through conventional means. I have studied this configuration across hundreds of historical examples. There is only one direction it resolves, and that direction is the most significant wealth creation opportunity I have seen in the last 20 years for the investors who understand it. Let me tell you why I am calling this an opportunity and not a warning. Because most of what you hear from financial commentators about the debt, about the dollar, about monetary system stress, is framed entirely as a threat. And it is a threat. But every major monetary transition in the last 100 years has simultaneously been the greatest wealth creation opportunity of that generation for the people who were positioned correctly. In 1971, when Nixon ended the gold standard, the people who held gold at $35 per ounce and understood what was happening compounded their wealth 24 times in 9 years. That was not luck. That was pattern recognition. They understood the mechanism. They acted before the mainstream caught up. And they built generational wealth from a moment that everyone else experienced as a crisis. Now here is the question I want you to sit with, honestly, for the next 60 seconds. Are you the kind of person who has studied monetary history deeply enough to recognize this pattern when it appears? Or are you the kind of person who is going to read about what happened in 2026 in a financial article 3 years from now? Because those two people are sitting in exactly the same position right now. The only difference is what they do with the next few minutes of information. In my work at Bridgewater, I developed what I call the big cycle framework. The idea is simple. Every major economy moves through a predictable sequence of phases driven by debt accumulation, monetary expansion, and eventually monetary transition. I have documented this cycle across 17 major empires and reserve currencies over 500 years. Without a single exception, every reserve currency that has ever existed has eventually been replaced or restructured when the debt load became unsustainable. Without a single exception, the British pound, the Dutch guilder, the Spanish real, the Roman denarius, every single one followed the same arc. And right now, in May 2026, the US dollar is at the same point in that arc that the British pound reached in 1956 during the Suez Crisis. That was the moment Britain's fiscal overreach became undeniable to the world. Sterling lost its reserve currency premium within 18 months of that event. I am not saying the dollar is going to zero. I am saying the premium that the dollar commands as the world's reserve currency is going to compress. And the assets that benefit from that compression are the same assets that have benefited from every previous reserve currency transition in 500 years of documented history. Here is what that compression looks like in practical investment terms, and this is the specific opportunity I am describing. When a reserve currency loses its premium, three things happen in sequence without exception. First, gold reprices upward significantly as investors and institutions rotate out of the reserve currency and into the asset that has served as monetary bedrock across every civilization in human history. I have documented gold's performance across every major monetary transition in the modern era, and the average real return in the 24 months following the inflection point is substantial. Second, commodity producers with structural pricing power outperform because the assets they produce, oil, copper, agricultural products, are priced in the weakening reserve currency and therefore rise in nominal terms automatically. Third, the investors who are holding the reserve currency assets that look safe, cash, long-duration bonds, passive equity funds concentrated in the largest companies, see their real purchasing power erode even as their nominal account balances stay stable. The illusion of safety turns out to be the most expensive position in the portfolio. I want to be direct about something because I believe in speaking plainly. The opportunity I am describing is not available to everyone, not because it requires special access or insider information, because it requires the willingness to act on data before the consensus catches up. And most people, regardless of how intelligent they are, regardless of how much they understand intellectually, cannot bring themselves to act on a position that feels contrarian to the mainstream narrative. I have watched this dynamic play out dozens of times across my career. The data is clear. The pattern is documented. The historical precedent is unambiguous. And the majority of investors will still wait for certainty that arrives 18 months after the window has closed. Here is what the data tells me about where we are in the sequence right now. Central banks globally bought more than 1,000 metric tons of gold in the last 12 months, the highest sustained pace in 50 years. These are not retail investors chasing momentum. These are the institutions that set monetary policy for sovereign nations, that have access to the most sophisticated economic research on earth, that are making 50-year strategic decisions about how to preserve national wealth. They are accumulating gold at record pace at exactly the moment the reserve currency transition I am describing is in its early stages. That is the signal I look at when I want to understand where the smartest long-term capital is positioning, not what analysts are saying on television, what the largest institutions in the world are actually doing with their most strategic reserves. The opportunity that will not come again is this specific window between when the pattern becomes visible in the data and when it becomes the consensus narrative in financial media. I have watched this window open and close 3 times in my career. In 1971, it lasted about 18 months before the mainstream caught up.